The streets of Lancaster City echoed with the sounds of battle, the harsh clatter of weapons and the grunts of men locked in desperate combat. Vandukes stood firm amidst the chaos, his form a towering shadow among the street fighters. His mission was simple: hold this timeline steady. The Vandukes were many, protectors of universes and timelines, each sworn to guard the threads of existence. This was just another battle in an endless war across infinite timelines, nothing Vanduke hadn't seen before. Smoke billowed from the burning husks of overturned carriages and cracked asphalt, debris scattered across the landscape as soldiers clashed in the once peaceful city. Vanduke's eyes scanned the battlefield with precision. In his hand, the weight of his .44 Magnum was familiar, comforting even, as it clicked against the leather of his glove. He'd fought these battles countless times, in countless places. This was just another day for the Vandukes until it wasn't. As he moved to cover behind the remnants of a shattered wall, something strange began to happen. At first, it was just a shift in the air, something subtle yet undeniable, a disorienting hum that resonated through his bones. Then, without warning, the very fabric of the world seemed to bend around him. His surroundings twisted, blurred, until the recognizable sounds of battle, the gunfire, the shouting faded into the background. He felt himself being pulled from the streets of Lancaster, through something invisible, something powerful. Vanduke's senses screamed in alarm. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Vandukes were never taken by surprise, yet here he was, feeling as if he were being wrenched from the timeline entirely. With a jolt, everything changed. He found himself thrown into a new world, his body slamming against a cold, metallic surface. Gasping, he scrambled to his feet, eyes wide as he took in his surroundings. The city streets of Lancaster were gone, replaced by an unfamiliar environment, sleek and metallic, lit by the distant glow of unfamiliar stars. Above him, the sky teemed with activity. Ships, no, starships of all sizes and shapes darted across the skyline, high above clouds that looked unnatural, tinged with hues he had never seen before. Laser fire streaked the heavens, bright bursts of energy zipping between vessels. He could see figures, two strange figures, some in gleaming white armor, others in darker uniforms, wielding weapons that sparked with energy. And then there were the ones with glowing swords made of pure light. Instinctively, Vanduke took cover behind a towering piece of debris, his magnum ready. He was a warrior, and warriors didn't panic. But he had to admit, this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Where was he? And more importantly, when was he? He glanced at his call sign, the small device strapped to his wrist, a tool that allowed him to contact other Vandukes across the multiverse. It should have worked instantly, pinging him back to his timeline, allowing him to regroup. But the screen flashed red. Error, timeline unknown. Vanduke frowned, trying again. The device blinked the same message. Frustration surged in his chest. This wasn't possible. Vanduk leaned back, taking a moment to catch his breath. He reached out with his ethereal vision, a gift every Vanduk had, an ability to peer into the threads of time, to navigate through the swirling layers of reality. But this time, when he tried to tap into it, nothing came. It was as though he had been cut off from the multiverse entirely, stranded in this strange place. He cursed under his breath, trying to steady his thoughts. It wasn't just his ethereal vision that had failed him. His calls to other Vandukis, their shared mental link that allowed them to coordinate across vast distances, were met with silence. No matter how many times he tried to reach out, it was as if they simply didn't exist here. The weight of isolation pressed down on him. The sounds of laser fire erupted nearby, pulling Vanduk from his thoughts. He ducked lower as a group of armored soldiers, clones, it seemed, rushed past, their white armor gleaming in the alien light. They carried weapons Vanduk had never seen before, sleek blasters that fired bolts of energy. And then there were the others, the ones with the swords. Vanduk had no idea who they were, but they moved with a grace and speed that told him they were dangerous, lethal. He needed a plan. He couldn't stay here out in the open, exposed to enemies he didn't understand. His instincts told him to fight, to engage, but he knew better. Vanduk was no stranger to danger, but fighting an enemy you couldn't even begin to comprehend was a fool's errand. He had to find a way out of here, back to Lancaster, back to his mission, back to the multiverse he knew. Vanduk glanced again at the call sign. Error, timeline unknown. The words blinked across the screen, taunting him. He growled in frustration, slamming a fist against the metal wall beside him. This couldn't be right. There were infinite timelines. He should be able to connect to one of them. Any of them. And yet, nothing. As the battle raged on around him, Vanduk realized something chilling. He wasn't just in another timeline, he was completely out of place, in a universe that wasn't part of the multiverse he knew. He was lost, truly lost. No call sign could reach him here. No ethereal vision could guide him. For the first time in a long while, Vanduk felt fear creep into his chest. He was on his own. Vanduk crouched lower, watching the battlefield unfold before him. His keen eyes darted between the two sides, both strange and alien to him, yet both unmistakably engaged in a fight that seemed as old as time itself. The droids, mechanical and unfeeling, marched in perfect synchrony. Their movements were precise, efficient, but devoid of any individuality. No commander stood among them, no organic life directing their actions. For a brief moment, Vanduk considered whether these machines had achieved some form of sentience. Could they be a life form in their own right? Could they be evolving, rebelling against their creators? But as he studied their behavior more closely, his suspicion faded. The droids, though disciplined, weren't acting with free will. They moved as a collective unit, following orders that clearly came from somewhere, or someone, beyond Vandukes' current understanding. Preset codes, algorithms. This was nothing new. He had seen it in many universes before. They were just tools, extensions of a larger force. Shifting his focus, Vanduk turned his attention to the other side. The clones, as he called them, were similarly uniform in appearance. Their armor was identical, white, and polished, like a sea of duplicates, each one indistinguishable from the next. Vanduk's tactical mind quickly assessed their ranks. These soldiers were clearly well trained, disciplined, and effective. But it wasn't the clones that truly interested him, it was the ones leading them. Men in robes, their movements fluid and graceful, yet with an undeniable strength. They wielded weapons that Vanduk had never seen before, swords, but not made of steel or any material he recognized. The blades were pure energy, humming with power as they carved through the air. These men were clearly more than soldiers, they were something else entirely. Warriors of a different kind. Vanduk's mind raced. He was a warrior himself, a protector, but this situation was unlike anything he had ever faced. He needed to make a decision, and quickly. His call sign was useless, his ethereal vision blocked. He couldn't contact the other Vandukes, couldn't retreat to a familiar timeline. He was stuck here, and the battle around him was only growing more intense. He weighed his options carefully. On one side were the droids, efficient, relentless, but ultimately just machines. Vanduk had no idea who or what controlled them, and helping them felt like a gamble. If they were merely puppets for a larger, unseen force, allying with them could put him at a disadvantage, especially if they lacked true leadership or strategy. On the other side were the clones. Though they were just as uniform in appearance as the droids, there was something different about them. They were human, at least in some way. They had leaders, those strange men with the glowing swords, and they seemed to be fighting with purpose. Vanduk had always preferred fighting alongside those who could think, adapt, and strategize. These clones, though identical, were still living beings. There was something tangible about their presence, something that spoke to the human spirit in them, however faint. He watched the men in robes move with precision, deflecting laser fire effortlessly with their strange weapons, guiding their troops with quick gestures and decisive actions. They were warriors, leaders. They had a cause, whatever that cause may be. Vanduk clenched his magnum in his hand, feeling the cold steel press into his palm. He had faced overwhelming odds before, battled enemies far beyond his understanding. But one truth had always guided him: trust the instincts that brought you here. His instincts told him that the men leading the clones were more than just fighters. There was something about them that reminded him of the Vandukes' leaders, protectors of something greater. And if there was one thing Vanduk knew, it was that his path often crossed with those who sought to preserve, not destroy. His decision crystallized. He couldn't sit this one out, couldn't afford to remain a bystander in a war that was quickly becoming his own. If he was to survive this place, if he was to find his way back, he needed allies. And the clones, led by those mysterious warriors with their laser swords, seemed like the better option. Vandukes took one last glance at the droids, then at the clones. He tightened his grip on the magnum, took a deep breath, and made his move. He had chosen his side. Vandukes leaped from behind the wreckage, his body moving with a speed and agility that defied the natural laws of most universes. His boots hit the ground, and in an instant, he was a blur, charging straight into the ranks of the droids. His .44 Magnum roared with each shot, the sound echoing through the chaos of the battlefield. Each bullet found its mark, tearing through metal and circuitry with ease. The gun reloaded itself seamlessly, as it always did, drawing from the power Vandukes had accumulated through countless timelines. It appears I still have some of my powers, he thought, a surge of relief washing over him. Whatever force had pulled him here hadn't stripped him of everything. He was still a Vandukes, still a protector, still a warrior. And he was going to make sure these droids knew it. The droids barely had time to react. Vandukes was a whirlwind of destruction, his movements fluid and precise, almost like a dance. He dodged laser blasts with ease, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to predict their paths before they were even fired. He leaped over the droids, twisting in mid-air, firing as he went. Sparks flew, and droids crumbled, their mechanical bodies crashing to the ground in heaps of twisted metal. In mere minutes, dozens of droids lay destroyed, and Vandukes hadn't taken a single hit. From a distance, the clones watched in awe. Two of them, their helmets reflecting the flickering lights of battle, turned to their leaders. "Generals, do you know who that is?" one of them asked, his voice crackling through the helmet's communicator. The three leaders Ahsoka Tano, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi paused for a moment, their eyes fixed on the unknown warrior tearing through the droid army. His combat style was unlike anything they had ever seen, brutal, efficient, yet graceful. His weapon was strange, not a blaster, but something that fired projectiles with devastating force. And his movements, they were beyond human. "I have no idea," Ahsoka replied, her lightsaber humming in her hand as she deflected another volley of blaster fire. Her eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the figure that seemed to have come from nowhere. Anakin's expression was one of both admiration and suspicion. "Whoever he is, he's on our side for now," he said, his grip tightening on his lightsaber. "Let's not waste the advantage." Obi-Wan stroked his beard, a thoughtful look on his face. "Indeed. We can worry about introductions later. Right now, we have a battle to win." Vandukes was aware of the eyes on him, but he didn't let it distract him. His focus was on the fight, on making sure he was doing everything he could to tip the scales. He spun and fired, his magnum unleashing rounds that punched through droid after droid, sending them sprawling. He felt the adrenaline coursing through him, his senses sharp, every detail of the battle clear in his mind. Finally, he paused, standing amidst the wreckage of the droids he had destroyed, his chest heaving. He glanced over at the clones and their leaders, giving them a brief nod. His eyes met those of the three robed figures, the leaders. They were skilled, powerful, and clearly respected by their troops. He took a moment to assess the battlefield. The droids were beginning to regroup, but the tide had shifted. Vandukes' sudden assault had given the clones an opening, a chance to push forward. The droids' unison had faltered, their formations breaking. Whatever advantage they had in numbers was being countered by the sheer ferocity and skill of the combined forces now against them. But Vandukes knew this was far from over. There were still so many questions. Where was he? How had he gotten here? And how could he get back? He was a stranger in this universe, a lone warrior from a distant place. But for now, he was a part of this fight, and he would see it through. Vandukes grinned as the droids closed in around him, their mechanical bodies clanking as they advanced, weapons raised. This was exactly what he wanted. His .44 Magnum fired off several rounds, and as the droids crumbled in front of him, he leaped forward, using his enhanced strength to tear through the enemy lines. Each punch sent droid heads flying from their bodies, sparking and sputtering as they hit the ground. He grabbed one droid by the torso and swung it like a club, smashing through its companions. Blaster bolts zinged past him, but he moved like a blur, dodging effortlessly, all while using fallen droids as shields when needed. As he tore through the machines, he noticed the robed figures, those mysterious warriors with their glowing swords now fighting alongside him. They moved with grace, their lightsabers cutting through the droids with swift, elegant strikes. Vandukes found himself in the middle of the action, battling side by side with them, and despite the chaos of the battlefield, there was an unspoken synchronization between them. Each move flowed into the next, each strike complementing the other. Not bad, one of them, the younger man with shaggy hair and a scar over his eye, called out between swings of his lightsaber. "I'm Anakin Skywalker. Who are you?" Vandukes ducked a blaster shot and fired back, destroying another droid. "Name's Vandukes," he replied, his voice gruff but steady. "From Earth. Planet in the Sol System, Milky Way Galaxy." Ahsoka Tano, the young woman with orange skin and Leku, flipped over a droid and sliced through it with her twin lightsabers. "Never heard of it," she said with a raised brow as she fought, her movements quick and precise. "What's your year?" 2024, Vandukes answered, elbowing a droid and then blasting another point blank. "I come from a place called Lancaster City, in America. And wherever I am now, I sure as hell didn't come here on purpose." Obi-Wan Kenobi, calm and collected despite the carnage around him, glanced at Vandukes while deflecting blaster bolts with his lightsaber. "You're on Felucia," he said, his voice measured. "We're in the midst of a galactic civil war, fighting the Separatists. This planet is one of the many battle fronts." Vanduk processed the information as he grabbed a droid by its arm, yanking it from its socket and using it to strike down another. "Felucia, huh? Well, I've never heard of it. I don't know how I got here, but I sure as hell didn't plan to land in the middle of a war zone in some galaxy I've never even heard of." Anakin sliced through a droid and gave Vanduk a nod of approval. "You're handling yourself pretty well for someone so out of place. Any chance your planet's part of this galaxy?" "No," Vanduk said with certainty. "My planet's timeline is different. We've never had anything like this. No starships, no droids, and definitely no laser swords." Ahsoka flashed a grin as she parried a droid's attack. "You mean lightsabers?" "Yeah, those." The four of them continued to fight, droids falling in heaps around them. Vanduk found himself oddly at ease fighting alongside these Jedi, even though everything about this situation was alien to him. They were clearly experienced warriors, and their precision and coordination reminded him of his own training as a Vanduk, protectors of the timelines, warriors bound to an eternal cause. As they cut down the last of the droids in their immediate vicinity, a moment of relative calm settled over the battlefield. Blaster fire still echoed in the distance, but for now, the area around them was cleared. Vanduk wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at the three Jedi. "So," he said, catching his breath, "what exactly are we fighting here?" Anakin exchanged a glance with Obi-Wan. "The Separatists. They're a faction trying to break away from the Galactic Republic. They use droid armies to do their dirty work. We're part of the Republic, fighting to stop them." "And you're Jedi?" Vanduk asked, gesturing to their lightsabers. "I've heard that word before." "That's right," Obi-Wan said, his tone formal. "The Jedi Order. We're keepers of the peace, protectors of the galaxy." Vanduk huffed. "Well, I'm used to protecting my own timeline, but this is something else." He glanced around at the strange, vibrant flora of Felucia, its bizarre alien landscape unlike anything he'd ever seen on Earth. "Any idea how I got here?" Ahsoka shook her head. "Not a clue. It's not every day we see someone from another galaxy just drop into our battle." Anakin nodded in agreement. "Whatever brought you here, it's strong. We've never encountered anything like it. But as long as you're here, we could use someone with your skills." Vanduk looked out across the battlefield, watching the remaining droids regroup in the distance. He clenched his magnum, feeling the weight of the situation settle on him. He had no way of getting back, no call sign, no ethereal vision to guide him. For now, he was stuck. But he was a fighter, a protector, and if this was where he had to be, then so be it. "All right," Vanduk said, locking eyes with Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan. "I'll fight with you. But once this is over, we're gonna figure out how the hell I got here and how I get back." The three Jedi nodded in agreement. Together, they turned to face the next wave of droids approaching from the horizon, ready to continue the fight. As the four of them fought their way through the remaining droids, Obi-Wan glanced over at Vandukes, curiosity flashing in his eyes. "You mentioned something earlier about timelines. What exactly did you mean by that? And do you think the Force is involved in how you got here?" Vandukes paused for a moment, taking in the question. "The Force?" he asked, unfamiliar with the term. Ahsoka, deflecting another shot with her lightsaber, gave a quick explanation. "The Force is what connects everything in the galaxy. It's an energy field created by all living things. It binds the galaxy together, gives Jedi our power, and helps us sense things sometimes even beyond time and space." Vandukes shook his head. "I don't know if what I do is connected to this Force. It might be something similar, but we Vandukes don't use anything quite like that. What I do know is that every version of Earth in the multiverse has two constants, Lancaster City and a Vandukes." "Every version of Earth?" Anakin asked, looking intrigued. "So there are more than one?" "More than you can count," Vandukes replied. "Each timeline has its own Earth, its own version of events. Some are nearly identical, others are so different that they're unrecognizable. And in every one of them, there's a Vandukes. It's our job to protect Lancaster City, no matter what version of Earth it's on. But it goes beyond that. Together, we Vandukes work to keep the entire multiverse safe." The Jedi exchanged glances. Obi-Wan's brow furrowed in thought. "Interesting. And you mentioned that you can move between these timelines?" Vandukes nodded. "Normally, yeah. We can jump between timelines, view them through our ethereal vision, and communicate with each other using something called the call sign network. It's how we coordinate across different versions of Earth. That's part of our power, along with enhanced strength, speed, and our weapons." He raised the magnum, its metal gleaming. "Our guns aren't just firearms. They're imbued with the energy of the multiverse itself, allowing us to take down enemies that exist across dimensions. We also have something called night sight, which lets us see in the darkest of places, as clearly as if it were daylight." Ahsoka tilted her head, still processing what Vandukes was saying. "Sounds like you Vandukes have a lot of power. What kind of enemies do you face, then?" Vandukes' expression darkened as he recalled the countless battles he and the other Vandukes had fought. "We face things that would break most people's minds. We battled Windogos, vicious, monstrous creatures that thrive on human flesh. Skinwalkers, who can steal the faces of the dead. Zombies, of course, but not like in the stories people tell. These are dead things animated by forces from beyond the multiverse. Necromorphs too," Vandukes continued, his voice becoming grim. "They're worse than the undead. They corrupt and distort life itself, turning it into something wrong. Then there's the water demon, a creature that lurks in any body of water, capable of pulling you into another timeline through its depths." Anakin's eyes narrowed in concentration as Vandukes continued listing his enemies. "We've fought the imposter, a being that can mimic anyone you know, perfectly. You never see it coming until it's too late. The false storyteller is another one. It manipulates reality, turning stories and legends into nightmares that come to life." Vandukes paused for a moment, taking a breath. "And then there are the bigger threats. The dream demon, a creature that controls your mind when you sleep, dragging you into twisted dreams that can kill you. The man behind the slaughter, an entity that hides in the shadows, manipulating people into committing unspeakable acts. And finally, the man of Crystal Lake, a figure whose existence spills into every version of Earth, a killer that returns again and again, no matter how many times we stop him." The Jedi were silent for a moment, each absorbing the enormity of what Vandukes had just described. They were warriors too, but this was something else. "So you fight these creatures across all timelines?" Ahsoka asked, a note of awe in her voice. "Yes," Vandukes replied, his voice steady. "It's what we're trained to do. The multiverse is fragile, and there are forces out there that want to tear it apart, to devour everything. The Vandukes stand between those forces and the destruction of everything we know." Obi-Wan looked contemplative, his gaze shifting from Vandukes to the battlefield. "That's a heavy burden to carry, even for someone as powerful as you. But it seems we have more in common than I thought. We Jedi also seek to protect, to maintain balance in the galaxy. Perhaps the Force and the power you Vandukes wield aren't so different after all." Vandukes considered the possibility. Maybe this Force was connected to his abilities in some way, or maybe it was just another aspect of a universe that existed outside his understanding. But whatever the case, he was here now, and the Jedi were allies in this fight. That was all that mattered. Anakin stepped forward, offering a half-smile. "Well, Vandukes, it looks like you've got a new battle to fight this time in our universe. And we could use someone like you." Vandukes nodded. "I'll fight with you. Until we figure out how I got here and how to get me back, I'm with you." The Jedi exchanged another glance, a silent understanding passing between them. They didn't know how Vandukes had arrived in their universe, but they could feel the weight of his words. He was more than just a soldier, he was a guardian of something far greater. And for now, that made them allies in the fight against the Separatists. With a new sense of purpose, Vandukes gripped his magnum tightly and readied himself for whatever came next. The battle for Felucia was far from over, and the multiverse, it seemed, had plenty more surprises in store. As the final droids retreated from the battlefield, Vandukes watched alongside the Jedi as the clones secured the area. It was a hard-fought victory, but the tide had turned decisively in their favor. Anakin and Ahsoka were already coordinating the fortification efforts with their troops, preparing for the next potential strike. Vandukes approached them, wiping some dust from his face. "What now?" he asked, his tone even but still curious. He wasn't used to following orders from anyone, let alone people from an entirely different universe. Anakin wiped the sweat from his brow. "Ahsoka and I will stay here with the men. We need to reinforce the area, secure our position before anything else can happen. There's still a lot of work to do." Ahsoka nodded in agreement. Fortifications, patrols, the usual. Obi-Wan, still catching his breath from the fight, approached Vandukes with a more thoughtful look. "As for you, Vandukes, I think it's time we visit the Jedi Council. They'll want to hear about your arrival, and perhaps they can help us understand how you ended up here." He motioned toward a nearby Venator-class Star Destroyer docked in the distance. "Come with me. We'll take my ship." Vandukes gave a small nod. He still wasn't sure what to make of all of this, but if there was any chance of getting answers, the Jedi Council seemed like the place to start. Together, he and Obi-Wan made their way to the Venator. Once aboard, Vandukes immediately noticed the efficiency with which the clone soldiers moved, and he couldn't help but be impressed. They looked identical, every single one of them, but as he walked alongside Obi-Wan through the ship's corridors, he started to notice subtle differences. Each clone carried themselves in a slightly different manner. Some walked with a spring in their step, others moved with a heavier weight, and the way they interacted with each other hinted at a variety of distinct personalities. It was nothing short of fascinating. Eventually, they arrived at the bridge, where Vandukes met Commander Cody, the officer in charge of Obi-Wan's clone detachment. Vandukes shook his head in disbelief, studying Cody's features. "So you really are clones? You're all the same, but different." Cody smirked, glancing at Obi-Wan. "That's right, sir. We may share the same face, but each of us has a mind of our own. We're soldiers, but we're also individuals. You'll see that if you spend enough time with us." Vandukes crossed his arms, still trying to wrap his head around the idea. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered. "In my world, cloning's just a concept, nothing more." Obi-Wan chuckled lightly. "It's one of the many things that make our galaxy unique. The clones have been invaluable in this war, and I think you'll find that they're more than capable in the battles ahead." As they prepared to launch into hyperspace, Vandukes found himself standing on the bridge with Obi-Wan and Cody, the stars stretching into brilliant lines as the Venator leaped forward into the void. Vandukes marveled at the sensation. He had traveled between timelines before, but space travel in this universe was something else entirely. It wasn't just moving between places, it was leaping across vast, unimaginable distances. As they settled into the journey, Vandukes turned to Obi-Wan, curiosity flickering in his gaze. So, tell me more about these Jedi. I've seen what you and the others can do with those lightsabers, but what exactly are you? What makes you different from everyone else in this galaxy? Obi-Wan smiled, his tone thoughtful as he began to explain. The Jedi are guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy. We've been around for thousands of years, guided by the Force, which is the energy field Ahsoka mentioned earlier. It binds all living things together, and through it, we gain our abilities, our enhanced reflexes, senses, and, in some cases, the ability to manipulate the world around us. It's not magic, though it may appear that way to outsiders. Vandukes raised an eyebrow. So, it's the Force that gives you those powers? Like moving objects, jumping in the air, sensing danger before it happens. Precisely, Obi-Wan replied. The Force has a light side and a dark side, and it is our duty as Jedi to remain aligned with the light. We train from a young age, learning discipline, control, and the art of combat. But it's not all about fighting. The Jedi are also scholars, diplomats, and healers. We serve the Republic, helping to maintain order and balance throughout the galaxy. Vandukes nodded slowly, taking it all in. Sounds a bit like what I do, but on a galactic scale. You keep the peace, fight the dark forces when necessary. We Vandukes do something similar, but we focus on protecting the timelines. Obi-Wan leaned in slightly, intrigued. And how do you remain connected to these timelines? The Force connects all life, but your powers seem to work differently. Vandukes tapped the call sign strapped to his wrist. We use this, and our ethereal vision, to stay in touch with other Vandukes across different versions of Earth. It's how we coordinate our efforts. We protect Lancaster City, but in doing so, we're really safeguarding the entire multiverse. The timelines are fragile, and there are dark forces out there, like the ones I mentioned before, that seek to exploit them for their own gain. Fascinating, Obi-Wan murmured, his expression thoughtful. And yet, despite our differences, I sense there is something similar in the way we operate. The Jedi are also spread across the galaxy, connected by the Force, working to protect life and maintain balance. Perhaps the multiverse and the Force are two sides of the same coin, different, but interconnected in some way. Maybe, Vandukes said, glancing out at the stars streaking by as they flew through hyperspace. But until we figure it out, I guess I'm just along for the ride. Obi-Wan smiled at that. Well, the Jedi Council is wise. If anyone can help us understand how you came to be here, it's them. The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the Venator's engines filling the air as they traveled through the vast unknown. Vandukes could only wonder what answers, if any, awaited him when they reached their destination. As the Venator entered Coruscant's space, the massive planet loomed before them, its surface shimmering with the lights of millions of buildings and vehicles. Vandukes stood on the bridge alongside Obi-Wan and Commander Cody, watching as they prepared for the next phase of their journey. The Star Destroyer slowed its engines, settling into orbit high above the city planet as smaller shuttles were prepped for the descent to the surface. Obi-Wan led Vanjik toward one of these shuttles, the hum of activity around them signaling the readiness of the crew. Vanjik looked out at the planet below as they boarded the smaller vessel. His mind raced. Coruscant was unlike anything he had ever seen, an endless city that covered the entire planet. The scale of it was staggering, and it made him realize just how far from home he really was. As the shuttle began its slow descent toward the surface, Vanjik couldn't help but wonder what awaited him at this Jedi temple. He needed answers. But elsewhere, far away from the landing bay, in the darkened halls of the Chancellor's office, something stirred. Chancellor Palpatine sat alone in his private chamber, his expression calm, but his mind alert. Through the Force, he had felt a disturbance, something new, something dangerous. His senses extended outward, probing the ripples in the Force. That was when he felt it. Vanjik. Palpatine's yellowed eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward in his chair, his fingers steepling. This presence was unlike any Jedi he had encountered. It wasn't bound by the same rules, the same limitations. This Vanjik, he was from outside their galaxy, outside their timeline. Intrigued, Palpatine reached out with the dark side of the Force, letting his awareness slip across the vast distance to probe the stranger's mind. As Palpatine reached into Vanjik's consciousness, he sifted through memories, moments of battle, of fierce dedication. He saw flashes of Vanjik's life, the countless battles across the multiverse, each one more brutal than the last. Palpatine saw Vanjik as a warrior bound to protect Lancaster City in every iteration of Earth, a man who fought against creatures like Windogos, skinwalkers, zombies, and otherworldly threats. He saw Vanjik's abilities, the ethereal vision that allowed him to peer through timelines, the call sign network that linked him to other Vanjikis, and the weapons that channeled multiversal power. Palpatine saw the history of the Vanjikis, their constant fight to maintain balance, their role as guardians of the multiverse, defending not just one reality but countless ones. They were powerful, resilient, and focused. And now one of them had arrived in his galaxy. But just as Palpatine delved deeper, studying the intricacies of Vanjik's mind, something unexpected happened. A voice, clear and defiant, echoed within the Chancellor's thoughts. "Did you like what you saw?" "I hope so. 'Cause I have no idea who or what you are, but just know I am not your kind. And I let you wander my mind as a warning. Do not fuck with me." Palpatine froze, his concentration wavering. The connection he had established with Vanjik's mind shattered like brittle glass. He pulled back, retreating from the consciousness that had been so disturbingly aware of his presence. His hands clenched the arms of his chair, his face twisting into a grimace as the dark side swirled around him. This Vanjik, he was no mere intruder. He had sensed Palpatine, allowed him to explore his mind, only to issue a warning that echoed with power and defiance. The realization sent a ripple of frustration through the Chancellor. This could complicate things. Vandukes wasn't just another piece on the galactic chessboard, he was an anomaly, something Palpatine hadn't foreseen. His presence, his abilities, and his connection to a larger multiverse posed a potential threat to the careful plans Palpatine had set in motion for his rise to power and the creation of the Galactic Empire. Palpatine sat back, the shadows of his office seeming to close in around him. Vandukes would need to be watched carefully. His power, while different from that of the Jedi, could interfere with the delicate balance Palpatine was manipulating. The dark side had given him foresight, but even that had its limits when dealing with someone from outside the galaxy. This will make things more difficult, Palpatine muttered to himself, his eyes narrowing as he considered his next move. Back on the shuttle, Vandukes felt a strange sensation, a cold prickle at the base of his neck, but he quickly shook it off as they continued their descent toward the Jedi Temple. Whatever had happened, whatever presence had tried to invade his mind, he had sent a clear message. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. Chancellor Palpatine sat in the dim light of his private office, his mind racing as he considered his options. He could feel the tension rising, the threads of his carefully woven plan tightening around him. The presence of this newcomer, Vandukes, posed a serious threat. The Jedi had always been an obstacle, but now, with Vandukes by their side, the balance of power had shifted in ways Palpatine hadn't anticipated. The thought crossed his mind, should he activate the executive orders? The contingency plans to eliminate the Senate and the Jedi in one swift stroke? Palpatine's hand hovered over the console as he pondered the thought of using both sides of the war to eliminate Vandukes and the Jedi. He had backdoors into the droid army, mechanisms he could activate to turn the tide instantly. With the right moves, he could spark a massacre that would allow him to seize control overnight. Vandukes wouldn't even see it coming perhaps. But then he hesitated, his fingers curling back from the console. Would it work? Palpatine's eyes narrowed. Vandukes wasn't like the others. His mind had been an impenetrable fortress, his strength unnerving. No, the Jedi and Vandukes together were too formidable. It wouldn't be enough to use brute force or manipulation. This would require patience, a longer game. For now, Palpatine had no choice but to sit and wait, observing from the shadows until he found the right opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, Vandukes found himself wandering the ancient halls of the Jedi Temple, walking side by side with Obi-Wan. The vast structure was unlike anything he had seen before, grand, serene, yet full of a quiet, contemplative power. Obi-Wan pointed out various landmarks as they moved through the corridors, explaining the role of the Jedi Council, the training of Padawans, and the significance of the temple itself. But as they approached one of the training rooms, Vandukes' attention was drawn to a scene unfolding before him. A towering figure loomed over a much smaller Jedi, what Obi-Wan had referred to as a Padawan. The larger man, his dark robes hanging heavily around him, was berating the young student, his tone harsh, his words biting. "That's Jedi Master Pong Krell," Obi-Wan said under his breath, his tone uneasy. "He's known for being difficult." "Difficult?" Vanjik muttered, watching Krell's actions closely. "Looks more like he's bullying the kid." The Padawan winced as Krell's voice grew louder, the scolding more intense. Vanjik felt a surge of irritation rise in his chest. He had no patience for bullies, especially not when they hid behind titles and positions of power. Without thinking, Vanjik stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air. "Hey!" he shouted. "Why don't you go fuck yourself, Krell?" Obi-Wan's eyes widened in shock, but before he could say anything, Krell's head snapped toward Vanjik. His four eyes glared with fury, and his broad shoulders squared up as he turned to face this outsider who dared challenge him. "Who do you think you are?" Krell growled, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. Vanjik stepped closer, his stance relaxed but ready. "Someone who doesn't take kindly to assholes pushing kids around. You think because you're a Jedi, you get to do whatever you want? Guess again." Krell's face twisted with anger. "You'll regret those words," he snarled, and in a flash, he threw a punch aimed directly at Vanjik's face. But Vanjik was faster. He dodged effortlessly, sidestepping the blow as if it were in slow motion. "Really?" Vanjik said, unimpressed. "That's the best you've got?" Krell's frustration boiled over, and without hesitation, he ignited one of his lightsabers. The blue blade hummed to life, casting a sharp glow across the room. "You'll learn your place, outsider," Krell spat as he swung the blade toward Vanjik. But what happened next stunned everyone, including Krell. Vanjik didn't flinch. He reached out with his hand, catching the lightsaber by its blade. The blue energy sizzled against his skin, but Vanjik held the weapon firm, his strength and power far beyond anything Krell could have expected. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, with a calm, steady voice, Vanjik leaned in and said, "You're out of your league." With a single motion, Vanjik snapped the lightsaber in half at the hilt, the glowing blade flickering and dying as the pieces fell to the ground. Krell stood frozen, his expression one of disbelief and humiliation. Vanjik stepped back, his eyes cold as he stared down the Jedi Master. "You've got a lot of nerve trying to pull that shit with me. Next time, think twice." Obi-Wan, still recovering from the shock of what had just happened, quickly stepped forward. "Master Krell," he said cautiously, trying to defuse the situation. "Perhaps it's best if we part ways for now." Krell, his face red with anger and embarrassment, said nothing. He turned sharply on his heel and stormed out of the room, leaving the broken remains of his lightsaber behind. Obi-Wan sighed, glancing at Vanjik. That could have gone better. Vanjik shrugged. Could have gone worse. The young Padawan, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, gave Vanjik a grateful nod before hurrying off. Obi-Wan, clearly still processing everything, gestured for Vanjik to follow. Let's keep moving. The council will want to hear about this, and I have a feeling they'll be very interested in meeting you now. As Vanjik and Obi-Wan made their way through the corridors of the Jedi Temple, the tension from the confrontation with Pong Krell slowly faded. Obi-Wan remained silent for most of the walk, occasionally glancing at Vanjik, as if trying to process what had just occurred. Vanjik, on the other hand, felt unbothered by the situation. He had dealt with egos bigger than Krell's before, and bullies were the same no matter what universe he found himself in. Finally, they arrived at the doors to the Jedi Council chamber. The towering doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the circular room where the council convened. Vanjik immediately felt the shift in atmosphere, a solemn energy radiating from the figures seated around the room. The Jedi Masters, each distinct in their appearance and presence, turned their attention to the newcomers. At the center of the room sat Yoda, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, his small frame belying the immense power and wisdom he carried. On either side of him sat other members of the council: Mace Windu, with his piercing gaze and calm authority; Ki-Adi Mundi, his long head and solemn demeanor instantly striking; and others like Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, and Chak Ti, all seated in a perfect arc around the room. Each Jedi Master represented a lifetime of dedication to the Force and the preservation of peace. Obi-Wan bowed respectfully before stepping forward. "Masters, I bring with me Johnny Vanjik, an outsider who appeared during our battle on Felucia. His arrival is unique, and his abilities suggest he is not from our galaxy." Vanjik stood tall, meeting the gaze of the council members, unafraid but respectful. He wasn't sure what to expect from these Jedi, but he had faced councils of powerful beings before, and he knew not to underestimate the wisdom in the room. Mace Windu was the first to speak. "We have felt your presence, Vanjik. The Force does not flow through you as it does through the Jedi, but there is power in you, something ancient and unfamiliar. Tell us, who are you, and how did you come to be here?" Vanjik nodded, stepping forward. "My name is Johnny Vanjik. I come from a place called Earth, but not from this galaxy. I'm part of a group that protects the multiverse, a collection of infinite timelines and realities. Every version of Earth has a Lancaster city, and every Lancaster city has a Vanjik. Our job is to guard those cities and keep the timelines stable." Yoda's ears twitched, and he leaned forward slightly, his cane tapping the floor as he regarded Vanjik carefully. "Multiverse, you say? A concept vast and ancient, it is. Familiar with such things, we are not." Mace Windu exchanged a glance with the other Jedi before turning his attention back to Vanjik. "And how did you arrive in our galaxy? What purpose brought you here?" "That's the thing," Vanjik replied, his voice steady. I don't know. One moment, I'm in the middle of a battle in my timeline, and the next, I'm yanked here to Felucia, in the middle of your war. My powers, my ethereal vision, aren't working here, so I can't leave. I'm stuck, at least for now. Ki-Adi Mundi rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The multiverse you speak of, it is not something the Jedi have ever encountered. Your arrival, if it was unintentional, may be tied to forces beyond our understanding. But we must determine if you pose a threat to this galaxy. Vanjik smirked slightly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I fight to protect timelines, not to disrupt them. I've fought things far worse than what I've seen here, creatures like Windogos, skinwalkers, necromorphs. My job is to stop the dark forces that try to destroy everything. If I'm stuck here, then I'll fight to protect this galaxy too, but I need to understand how I got here and how to get back. Shakti, her calm voice cutting through the tension, asked, "And what of your powers, Vanjik?" You demonstrated strength and ability far beyond that of an ordinary being when you confronted Master Krell. How do your abilities work? Vanjik glanced at Obi-Wan before answering. We Vanjikis are enhanced. We've been given strength, speed, and endurance far beyond normal limits. We can tap into something called ethereal vision, which lets us see and navigate between timelines, and our weapons, like my magnum, are imbued with the power of the multiverse. We can see in the darkest places as if it's day, and we're trained to fight some of the worst things that crawl through the multiverse. The room was silent for a moment, the Jedi Masters absorbing the enormity of what Vanjik was saying. They had dealt with many threats, but the multiverse and the beings that threatened it was something beyond their comprehension. Finally, Yoda spoke again, his voice soft but filled with wisdom. Unique, your situation is. Much to learn, we still have. But help you, the Jedi will. A danger you may not be, but a mystery, you remain. Mace Windu nodded in agreement. For now, you are welcome to stay within the temple as we attempt to uncover the nature of your arrival. We will meditate on this, and perhaps through the Force, we can gain insight. Vanjik nodded. I appreciate the help. Believe me, I want answers as much as you do. Obi-Wan, sensing the tension lift slightly, stepped forward. Thank you, Masters. Vanjik has proven himself in battle, and I believe he can be trusted. Yoda's gaze softened. Trust, earned it must be. But for now, we offer our assistance. As the meeting concluded, Vanjik followed Obi-Wan out of the chamber. He had met the Jedi Council, and while he respected their power and wisdom, he still felt the gnawing uncertainty of his situation. Answers wouldn't come easily, but for now, he had allies and he knew he would need them if he was going to find a way back to his timeline. As they exited the council chambers, Vanjik walked alongside Obi-Wan, the weight of the recent conversation still heavy in the air. He had given the Jedi Council a glimpse into his world, his powers, and the vast responsibilities he carried, but the mystery of his arrival here remained unresolved. The Jedi had offered their assistance, but Vandukes knew that finding answers would require more than just meditation. Obi-Wan's expression was contemplative as they made their way through the temple's grand halls. Then, after a moment of silence, Obi-Wan turned to Vandukes with a more serious look in his eyes. "There's someone else you should meet." Vandukes raised an eyebrow. "Another Jedi?" "No," Obi-Wan replied. "The Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, Chancellor Palpatine. He's been instrumental in guiding the Republic through this war, and he wields considerable influence. If anyone can help us navigate the complexities of your situation, it's him. Well, let's just say he's well connected." Vandukes nodded, intrigued by the suggestion. He hadn't been in this galaxy long, but it was becoming clear that power and influence were concentrated in a few key individuals. If Palpatine had as much sway as Obi-Wan suggested, then meeting him could provide valuable insights, or at the very least, help Vandukes understand the political landscape of this galaxy. As they made their way to a shuttle that would take them to the Senate District, Vandukes couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Jedi had been transparent, if somewhat cautious, but the idea of meeting a political leader, a chancellor who held so much power, gave him pause. He had dealt with powerful figures before, and he knew all too well that politics often concealed more than it revealed. After a short journey across the glittering skyline of Coruscant, they arrived at the towering spires of the Senate building. The architecture was imposing, its sheer scale a testament to the Republic's vastness. Vandukes followed Obi-Wan into the Chancellor's office wing, passing through corridors filled with senators, aides, and Republic officials. The atmosphere here was different from the Jedi Temple, busier, more formal, with an air of authority that felt less spiritual and more calculated. As they approached the entrance to the Chancellor's private office, Obi-Wan turned to Vandukes with a reassuring smile. "The Chancellor is a good man. He's done much to keep the Republic together during this war. Just be honest with him, as you were with the Council." The large doors to the office slid open, and Vandukes stepped inside, immediately taking in the room's opulent decor. The office was grand, lined with columns and dark wood, with a wide view of Coruscant's cityscape beyond the large windows. In the center of the room, standing behind his desk, was Chancellor Palpatine. The man who stood before them seemed outwardly calm, his face lined with age but possessing a certain warmth and politeness. He smiled as Obi-Wan and Vandukes entered, his presence filling the room not through sheer force, but through a subtle, almost gentle charisma. "Ah, Master Kenobi," Palpatine said, his voice smooth and pleasant. "It's always a pleasure to see you. And you must be the visitor from another world, the one I've heard so much about." He extended a hand toward Vandukes, his expression welcoming. "Johnny Vandukes, is it?" Vandukes shook the Chancellor's hand, but as he did, he couldn't help but feel the undercurrent of something darker, something hidden just beneath the surface of Palpatin's genial demeanor. "That's right," Vandukes said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Palpatin. "I hear you're the man to talk to if I want to get a handle on things around here." Palpatin chuckled softly. "I do what I can to serve the Republic and maintain order in these troubled times. Master Kenobi has spoken highly of you, and I must admit, I'm quite intrigued by your story." Obi-Wan nodded. "Vandukes' arrival in our galaxy is unprecedented, Chancellor. We're still trying to understand how and why he was brought here." Palpatin's gaze shifted back to Vandukes, his eyes briefly flickering with something deeper, something that only Vandukes, with his heightened awareness, could sense. "Yes, such a mysterious occurrence," Palpatin said smoothly. "And one that may require more than just the Jedi's involvement to unravel. The Senate, too, may need to be made aware of this anomaly." Vandukes felt a chill crawl up his spine as Palpatin spoke. There was something about this man, something that didn't sit right. He had encountered powerful beings before, beings who masked their true intentions behind pleasant smiles and kind words. But he didn't let it show. Instead, he maintained his calm, giving only a small nod in response. "Your galaxy is definitely different from what I'm used to," Vandukes said, keeping his tone neutral. "I don't know how I got here, but I do know I'll need all the help I can get to figure it out." Palpatin smiled, his expression remaining as warm as ever. "Of course. I'm sure, together, we can find a solution. The Republic is vast, and our resources are considerable. You are in good hands, Vandukes." Obi-Wan glanced between the two men, sensing the subtle tension but remaining diplomatic. "The Jedi Council is already looking into the matter. Vandukes has offered to assist us as long as he remains in our galaxy, and I believe his abilities could be invaluable to our efforts." Palpatin's eyes twinkled, and he gave a slight nod of approval. "Then it seems we are fortunate to have such an ally in our midst." But even as Palpatin spoke, Vandukes could feel the weight of the Chancellor's attention pressing down on him, like an unseen force probing for weaknesses. Vandukes' mind flashed back to the moment when he had felt that same presence during the descent to Coruscant, when someone, or something, had tried to invade his thoughts. "It was you, wasn't it?" Vandukes thought to himself, his mind now clear on what had happened. He didn't say it aloud, but the thought was a warning, the same warning he had issued before: "Do not fuck with me." Palpatin's smile never faltered, but there was a flicker just for a moment, as if he, too, had heard Vandukes' unspoken challenge. "Well then," Palpatin said, his voice smooth once more, "I look forward to seeing how things unfold, Master Vandukes. The galaxy is full of surprises, and I suspect your presence here will be one of the more interesting ones." Vandukes simply nodded, already knowing that this meeting was the beginning of a game one he had no intention of losing. As Vandukes walked side by side with Obi-Wan, leaving Chancellor Palpatine's opulent office behind, his mind was racing. The meeting had been civil enough on the surface, but beneath the Chancellor's warm smiles and calm demeanor, Vandukes had sensed something darker, something insidious. "So you're the one who wandered my mind," Vandukes thought, his eyes narrowing slightly as he replayed the subtle moments of their encounter. He had felt that same invasive presence back when they were descending toward the Jedi Temple, a probing force that had attempted to dig into his thoughts. It all made sense now. Palpatine had been the one responsible, using some unseen power to try to learn more about him. Vandukes' steps slowed slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. Palpatine had been careful, subtle even, but Vandukes wasn't someone to be easily manipulated. He had dealt with beings far more malevolent than the Chancellor, and while this man might hold considerable power in this galaxy, Vandukes had seen behind the mask. He knew what Palpatine had tried to do, and the warning he had sent through the telepathic encounter still stood firm. "You think you know me, but you don't. Not yet." As they walked through the Senate's grand halls, Vandukes turned his head just slightly, glancing at Obi-Wan. The Jedi seemed deep in thought, possibly unaware of the hidden battle that had taken place during the meeting. Vandukes didn't say anything just yet. He still wasn't entirely sure how deep Palpatine's influence ran in this galaxy, or how much the Jedi knew. But one thing was clear: the Chancellor wasn't someone to be trusted. For now, Vandukes would keep that knowledge close, waiting for the right moment to act. He had played these games before, navigating the shadows of power, and he knew when to strike and when to wait. "This isn't over, Palpatine. Not by a long shot."